Welcome back to the Great Debate Podcast. I'm your host, Matt, and this is your co-host.
Hello, everybody.
Anyway, today we're going to be debating whether life comes from spontaneous generation or biogenesis.
You know, there isn't really much to debate. It's obvious life comes from spontaneous generation.
I don't know about all that, but before we get too deep into it, let's tell the audience our segments for today. Segment 1 is all about what spontaneous generation and biogenesis are.
Yes, and segment 2 is all about which one is actually correct.
And segment 3 is about how life originated.
That's quite the tricky one, isn't it? Aren't modern-day scientists still debating upon where life originated?
Exactly. That's why it's so important to discuss.
I suppose so.
Well, let's get to it. Since I believe in biogenesis, I'll break it down for you. The theory of biogenesis is a theory that explains the generally accepted answer as to how life is made. The theory states that life must come from other living organisms. In other words, a frog can't just magically poof its way into existence from a rock. The frog had to have come from another living frog.
That's a good definition for your made-up theory. But here's a definition where life actually comes from. Spontaneous generation is generally considered to be an outdated theory when referring to how life on Earth currently comes to be. We all know they're lying, though, just how the moon landing was faked.
Okay, Yakum, that's a theory for a different day. Let's stay on topic, alright?
I guess so, but I was only trying to show the viewers the truth.
Right. So what's spontaneous generation?
Yes, spontaneous generation also explains how life comes to be. I believe that living things can come from non-living objects.
What, like a giraffe can spawn from pepperoni pizza?
No, you're making a joke out of all of it. That's clearly not what I meant. I mean, like small living things, aka microorganisms, can come from non-living things, such as rotting meat or dirty cloth.
I guess that's a little more reasonable. I still don't buy it.
Whatever, let's recap for our guests without all this sidetracking. Biogenesis is a theory that all living things must come from other living things, and spontaneous generation is the theory that some living things can come from non-living things.
Excellent. Now let's start segment 2 and get to the fun stuff. Debating who's actually right. Since I'm the better host, I'll start my case first. I believe in biogenesis because there are many scientists who have helped predict spontaneous generation.
Name one.
I'll name 3. Ready? Spallanzani and Pasteur.
Wow. But tell me who they actually are and what they did, so I know you're just not making this all up.
Alright, well let's see. Reddy was the first of the bunch to not quite buy spontaneous generation. See, back in his day, way long ago, around 1668, people believed in all sorts of wild things. A few of them I think you still somehow believe. They believed in the spontaneous generation of microorganisms, and some of them believed in the spontaneous generation of complex organisms too. Even known alchemist Johannes Baptista von Helmont believed in the spontaneous generation of mice. He thought they came from wheat and old rags incubated in a closet. Imagine that, but Reddy believed there was no way it was true. There were some others that shared his opinion, but he was the first to actually do an experiment to support it. One of the wild things people believed back then was that maggots came from rotten meat that was left out.
Exactly. It stands to make sense if every time they left meat out to rot and the flies got in it, then why wouldn't it be true?
Hold your horses. That's where Reddy's experiment came in. While you're right, it stood to make sense at the time. Reddy showed it to be straight up false. So what he did was take 3 containers of fresh meats left to rot, all set up in different ways. The first jar was left completely open, where anything could get in. The second jar was covered with a mesh covering, so the fresh air could get in, and flies could still find the meat, but the flies couldn't get past the mesh. The last jar was tightly sealed. His results showed he was right. The first jar, with no covering, had maggots and flies on the meat. The second jar, however, had flies and maggots surrounding it, but no maggots were actually past the mesh covering. And the last tightly sealed jar, as expected, had flies swarming around, but no maggots. Therefore, maggots, aka fly larvae, had to have come from other flies and not the meat itself. While Reddy didn't entirely disprove spontaneous generation, it was a big step on the way and convinced most people that at least complex organisms couldn't come from non-living things.
Alright, good case, I guess. But now it's my turn. You know who Aristotle is?
Yeah, don't everybody? He was a super famous philosopher and scientist, right?
Exactly, and he's super smart. He's the one that made the first push of the spontaneous generation around 350 BC. Based on what he observed around him, he puts it like this.
I know what you're talking about. It's from his book, I tell you. So with animals, some spring from parent animals according to their kind, whilst others grow spontaneously and not from kindred stock. And of these instances of spontaneous generation, some come from putrefying earth or vegetable matter, as is the case with a number of insects, while others are spontaneously generated in the insides of animals out of their secretions of their several organs. Well, I know where you got this from. You pulled that quote from pastoralbrewing.com website, and it's one of the things Aristotle said in The History of Animals.
So pretty much he's saying that while some animals spring from their parents, there's some animals that don't come from their kin and instead come from rotting things or vegetables.
Okay, good observation for the BC times, but it's missing one important thing.
And what's that?
Evidence. Even if it's by a wicked smart dude, everything you said is just observations, not actual proof.
Show your roll there. Oh, wait, slow your roll there. I was just introducing the idea. I have an example with proof of spontaneous generation.
You know, for some reason I have a hard time believing that.
I got one word for you, Macy. Needham.
Wait a minute, wasn't this stuff disproved?
No, my turn to talk. I make your case in a minute.
Whatever.
As I was saying, John Needham was another scientist that believed in spontaneous generation and attempted an experiment to support it. He had some soups that were exposed to air and microorganisms grew there. This made his claim that even non-living things have some kind of life source even further. He boiled some of the soup for a little bit and poured it into a clean flask. Then he corked in the top and the microorganisms got there. This obviously shows that the microorganisms spontaneously generated there. I mean, he boiled the soup and everything.
Oh, wow, okay. That's a lot to unpack. First of all, I can almost guarantee that flask was not completely sterile. Because, I mean, he only boiled it for a few minutes, as you said. Second of all, corks are porous, which means that air can get in, therefore bacteria in the air could have got in, because it's not completely sealed off. And you're forgetting the whole last half of the story. Needham's attempt at an experiment was the first of a drawn-out debate. Also, he didn't replicate it, so...
Fine, you tell the second half of the story.
Glad to. After Needham saw a shot at an experiment, Spallanzani called him out and tried some more experiments for himself. He did 3 different variations. First of all, he boiled some soup in a flask for an hour and melted the flask shut. For the second flask, he only boiled it for a few minutes and melted it shut again. And for the third flask, it was boiled for an hour too, but still with the cork. As most people would have guessed, the first flask was completely free of microorganisms, while the other 2, not so much. From there, Spallanzani concluded that an hour of boiling the soup would sterilize it completely. A few minutes of boiling wasn't enough to kill the microorganisms that were originally there, and the flask that was corked shut was contaminated from the air. I don't know why a sterile flask didn't have some microorganisms poof out of nowhere. Maybe because it's not true.
Okay, now you stop being smart about it. And also, who's to say a few minutes of boiling didn't kill all those other microorganisms? What if it did and new ones generated there? Needham also said that this sterile soup was overboiled and killed the life force that was in there. With no fresh air, the life force couldn't come back. Therefore, there was no life was generated.
You do realize that your reasoning just replaces microorganisms in the air with your life force, right?
It does not.
Whatever. Like me and you, Spallanzani and Needham couldn't settle their argument. So in 1860, the Paris Academy of Sciences stepped in to help settle the debate. They offered prize money to whoever could make an experiment to help solve the issue. Remember the 3 scientists I mentioned earlier?
Yeah, Redi, Spallanzani, and Pasteur, right?
Yeah, this is where Pasteur comes in. He was the nail in the coffin when it comes to helping reject spontaneous generation.
How so?
Basically, he did an experiment similar to Spallanzani and Needham's, but better fine-tuned to have definitive results. While he didn't disprove the theory entirely, such as not disproving if life originated from spontaneous generation, he did it the right way and tested the specific theory that Needham and Spallanzani were arguing about.
Beautiful. He helped support the theory of biogenesis, but how exactly?
Like everyone else, he performed an experiment. His experiment pretty much appeased what everyone was saying was wrong with the others. He made some broth similar to what Spallanzani and Needham used and put it into different shaped flasks. Two types were the swan neck flask and a straight neck flask. The swan neck flask made it to where fresh air was still available, like Needham claimed there needed to be so the so-called life force could work. It also made it so that bacteria in the air couldn't contaminate the broth because it couldn't be blown over the curved part of the flask. The straight flask, however, could easily allow for fresh air and microorganisms, to get into the broth. He boiled both broths and let them sit, and lo and behold, there were no microorganisms present in the swan neck flask, and there were some present in the straight neck flask. He also broke the neck off one of the swan neck flasks to where microorganisms and fresh air could access the broth. Again, some sort of microorganism appeared there. He came to this conclusion because this completely sterile swan neck flask maintained its same color, while the others became cloudy and did not. After this experiment and observations, Pasteur concluded that spontaneous generation did not happen in these conditions. His results were valid because he only changed one thing each time, and his experiment was easily repeatable by other scientists.
Oh, dang. Okay, you might have convinced me.
Wait, actually?
Yes, on that part of the theory, but I want to know what your belief is on how life originally started.
Perfect. I want to know yours too. But first, it's time for a shout out to our sponsors, also known as my sources. Our sponsors for information on Pasteur are Britannica, Pasteur Brewing, MUN.ca, BioLibreText, and HowStuffWorks.com. General information on biogenesis and spontaneous generation is from RBR Life Science, Study.com, Apologetics Press, and Biology Online. Information on Grady came from NUN.ca. Info on Needham and Spallanzani came from EBSCO and NAU.edu. Specific info on biogenesis and spontaneous generation were from Mensa, American Science Affiliation, Pasteur Brewing, and STUDOCO or Studoco. Extra information is from Space.com and Green Matters. My knowledge on abiogenesis and the origins of life came from Britannica, CreationResearch.org, EBSCO or EBSCO, Answers in Genesis, Levi M. Smith, Science and Christian Makes the Case for God by Eric Metaxas, Countercurrent Apologetics, The History of Animals, and of course the Bible. Our final sponsor is Class Biology Notes for helping reinforce info already found. That concludes our sponsors for today's episode.
Wow, that sure is a lot of sources.
Yep, only the best.
So our final segment. Now that you've gotten me to believe that spontaneous generation doesn't currently occur, let's talk about the question on everybody's minds. Did spontaneous generation ever occur? If not, how did life come to be?
Yep, those are some very important topics, especially since they are still being debated to this day. Since this one's a little more complicated, let's each state our claim one at a time, then take turns explaining.
Okay, I believe that first came into existence was from non-living organic material. It was able to happen because there were very specific conditions of the Earth that don't currently exist, such as lists of the atmosphere and UV radiation.
Okay, that can make sense since we really don't know exactly what condition the Earth was in all those years ago. I believe, though, that life was intentionally made by Creator God and not just chanced into existence.
That's a very common belief. Do you have any evidence or logic to back it up?
No, I don't have any evidence, but there is some logic involved. One of the main logical explanations for my belief is the intelligent design theory. It's not necessarily a scientific theory, but it is common among those who share my belief. The ID theory helps to explain that life as we know it had to have had an intelligent designer.
Okay, why do you say that? Couldn't throughout the 200 billion galaxies, life would have had the right conditions somewhere?
So that's a good point, because that makes the possibility go up a lot. But there are two main reasons to ID the intelligent design theory that reject the idea of spontaneous generation. For one, life is so vastly complex and delicately balanced. it makes sense for it to have had a designer. The second reason, like we've been discussing, there are so many variables and conditions needed for life to be able to exist. I just don't see how it was an accident. In the book, Science Increasingly Makes a Case for God, Eric Metaxas said, "Today, there are more than 200 known parameters necessary for a planet to support life, every single one of which must be perfectly met or the whole thing falls apart."
I don't know, man. I still don't buy it. It just feels like there's so much missing.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to debate upon things that actual scientists are still trying to figure out.
So, since we don't have enough evidence, all we gotta do is just kind of dig deeper.
Yeah.
So,
Alright. Is Carl Scum late for now?
yeah.
Alright. I'm glad to hear it. So that's the end of segment 3. Pretty much to recap the whole thing, biogenesis is a theory that life comes from other living things. Spontaneous generation is the theory that life can come from non-living things. Scientists like Grady and Pasteur have taken great leaps to help project this theory. While it's generally accepted that spontaneous generation no longer happens, modern scientists are still debating if spontaneous generation is how life originally came to be. Well, that about wraps it up. Hope all the listeners know a little more about spontaneous generation and biogenesis.
Peace out, guys.
Peace out and God bless you. That's the Great Debate Podcast signing off.